The old house creaked and groaned like it was alive, shifting in its bones each time the wind howled outside. Megan pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling a slight chill settle into her skin. It wasn't the kind of cold that seeped in from outside. This one felt deeper, like something was wrong inside the house itself. But she was alone, wasn't she? It had been 2 months since Megan had moved into the small, off-campus house with her roommate, Jenna. It was a cheap find given the area. Historic charm, the landlord had called it. Megan would have called it creepy, especially now that she was alone. Jenna was away visiting family for a week, leaving Megan with only her cat, Whiskers, for company. And as much as she loved the little tabby, she couldn't help but feel uneasy, especially when the cat began acting strangely. Whiskers had taken to pawing at the wall in the hallway. It had started 3 days ago, and Megan brushed it off as one of her cat's weird quirks at first. But by the 4th night, it was hard to ignore the pattern. Whiskers would sit in the same spot, right under the attic door, scratching the wall as if something behind it needed to be freed. That night, the scratching noise woke her. She bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. Silence. The darkness of the room pressed in on her, but she swore she had heard it just faint enough to disturb her dreams. Whiskers was perched on the end of the bed, ears forward, staring at the closed bedroom door. Megan shivered and glanced at the clock. It was 2:34 a.m. The world outside was quiet, still, and dead. But inside, something moved. A faint, shuffling noise came from the hallway, like someone slowly dragging their feet across the hardwood floor. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. There was no way anyone could be in the house. She had locked all the doors, hadn't she? Whiskers jumped off the bed and dashed toward the hallway, disappearing into the dark. Megan hesitated, then slowly climbed out of bed. She grabbed the nearest thing to a weapon, a heavy lamp, and crept to the door. She held her breath as she turned the knob, letting the door swing open. The hallway was empty, but something was watching her. She could feel it. Over the next few days, the noises persisted. The scratching, the occasional thud from the attic, and more than once, Megan swore she saw movement from the corner of her eye. Jenna wasn't due back for another 4 days, and Megan was becoming increasingly paranoid. She didn't want to admit that she was scared, but the house didn't feel right. Whiskers seemed on edge too, never leaving her side for long and constantly scratching at that same wall. It wasn't until the strange smell that she decided to call the landlord. It started as a faint odor, something damp and sour, but it grew stronger each day. By the 5th day, it was unbearable. Mr. Randall, the landlord, was skeptical at first, but after Megan insisted, he agreed to come by and take a look at the attic. They climbed up together, Randall grumbling the entire time about how old houses made noise and how young people were too jumpy. But as soon as they stepped into the attic, Randall stopped talking. There was a small pile of bedding in the corner, old blankets, worn and stained, stuffed behind a wall of boxes. Wrappers littered the floor, along with what looked like cans of food, and the smell, the awful, rotting stench that made Megan gag. "Someone's been living up here," Randall muttered, shining his flashlight around the space. But how? Megan's stomach turned. Someone had been living in her house, watching her, listening to her, waiting. That night, Megan didn't sleep. She tried to convince herself that the intruder had been scared off by Randall's visit. The police had come, taken a report, and promised to investigate, but deep down, Megan knew they wouldn't find anything. It wasn't over. She sat in the living room, clutching her phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, Whiskers curled up beside her. The house was deathly quiet. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, each second dragging on like an eternity. Then the scratching returned. This time it wasn't faint. It was loud, insistent, coming from inside the walls. Megan's heart pounded as she stared at the spot where Whiskers had been scratching for days. The noise was coming from right there inside the wall. Before she could think, she grabbed a chair and climbed up, pressing her ear against the wall. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, only silence. Then, a voice, a low, rasping whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "I'm still here."